Hello there, and welcome to this edition of the Bost Watch Report. We're standing up for Southern Illinois because truth matters. Let's start with a pattern that's being revealed through Mike Bost's newsletter and his headlines. Representative Bost constantly says he's fighting for you. He tells veterans and Southern Illinois families he is fighting for them, smiling photos, upbeat newsletters, press releases about wins. But if you take a closer look at the numbers, there's a bit of a pattern that does emerge. Big promises, shrinking programs, creeping privatization. Let's start with VA munchable cuts. That's how Doge labels what gets cut, at least. So ProPublica revealed that the Department of Government Efficiency, as they call themselves, used an AI program, ChatGPT, to sort VA contracts into two buckets. Non-munchable, which means keep it, and munchable, which is cuttable. And here's what it looks like in practice. Non-munchable, bedside nursing, direct patient care. Sure, those are kept, kind of the baseline requirements for any sort of a healthcare system. Now the munchable, the things that were considered cuttable, the things that are gone, research databases, administrative support, clinical infrastructure, things that really do play a critical role. They're not just some sort of random fraud, waste, and abuse. They play a critical role within any healthcare system. But the verbiage here allows the politicians, such as Mike Bost, to say that no direct services were cut. In reality, they're dismantling systems that actually keep those services running in the long run. And it really puts veterans' health at risk. There's 9 million veterans served by VA healthcare. And at this point, we're about 14,400 healthcare jobs unfulfilled. That's 1,500 doctors and about 4,900 nurses. 11,700 cuts were to social workers, psychologists, those folks that are going to play in hand in helping veterans with things like PTSD. So matter of fact, the VA Inspector General in 2025 found that 80 to 90% of facilities were short on doctors and or nurses. They were already shorthanded before these cuts. Why is it important? Well, there's not just budget line items. Cancer registries, they track illness trends in veterans, and those could become outdated or downright useless. There becomes less visibility into rare cancers and brain injuries linked to combat exposure. And there's fewer answers for veterans showing rising rates of toxic exposure-related disease. There's a dedicated veterans advocacy group, Burn Pits 360, that's warning exactly that. Fewer answers for people that have served because there's no research or staff to look into this for them. Now, the PACT Act, which was signed in 2022, was scheduled to expand VA care for veterans exposed to toxic hazards starting March of 2026. The true test about how the Trump administration honors combat veterans is whether or not that rollout actually happens. That's going to show where their priorities actually lie. Moving on to rural health. Bost celebrates a win for rural Illinois. In his January 11, 2026 Bost Bulletin, Representative Bost celebrates $193 million in new funding through the Rural Health Transformation Program, supposedly a boost for 1.6 million rural residents. So what's the problem? The problem is the other side of that legislation. While it's true that the Working Families Tax Cuts Act does create rural health funding, it cuts Medicaid by $155 billion over 10 years, and rural hospitals depend heavily on Medicaid patients. A local administrator with Marion Deaconess Hospital says, and I quote, "When you read the legislation, the funds don't have to flow to rural hospitals. We've got to advocate to make sure that funding reaches rural health because it absolutely can be transformative." So here's that pattern. Announce a win, but don't mention what it costs. And we see this over and over again with Representative Bost. With veteran care, promises support, cuts the infrastructure. Rural health, announces funding, doesn't mention the Medicaid cuts. VA jobs, lets thousands of positions go unfilled while claiming that no direct services were cut. Quite frankly, Southern Illinois deserves the full picture and not just the press release. Moving on to Trump's war on Iran, and yes, I did say war. Here's what voters were told at various points during Trump's run. Quote, I will stop the wars. Quote, no more Middle East conflicts. Quote, I'll end them, not start them. Year and some months into his term, here's what actually happened. In 2015 now, we got to go back a little bit, Iran actually agreed to limit its nuclear program under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Uranium enrichment was capped at 3.67%, which is far below the 90% for weapons grade. International inspectors were given unrestricted access. The program was under control. It worked. For some reason, it didn't work well enough for Donald John Trump. So in 2018, President Trump withdrew from the agreement, calling it a, quote, bad deal, and reimposed severe sanctions. So with the deal off the table, inspectors, they lost their access. Tehran resumed enrichment. By 2019, Iran was producing higher grade uranium. By 2025, enrichment levels reached 60%. So withdrawing from a working agreement failed to make anyone safer. Let's move forward to June of 2025. Trump launched airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. The result, as June 21st, quote, Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. 1 month later, Pentagon reports told a different story. The strikes set back Iran's program by roughly 2 years. The program was certainly not destroyed. However, Trump and Department of War Secretary Pete Hegseth kept repeating, obliterated. 8 months later, February 21st, 2026, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told Fox News, quote, Iran was probably a week away from having industrial-grade bomb-making material. In other words, 8 months after Iran's nuclear program was supposedly obliterated, officials warned it had nearly recovered. Caroline Leavitt went on to say, well, there's many reasons and arguments that one could make for a strike against Iran. There's many reasons and arguments that one could make for a strike against any country, really. That's not clarity, that's evasion. So that's the cause and effect. 2015, enrichment capped at 3.67%. 2018, limits removed. 2019 to 25, Iran enriches to 60%. June of 2025, program is set back maybe 2 years. Then February 2026, program nearly recovered. A week away. As the saying goes, make it make sense. Meanwhile, the cost at the pump, June 2025, $2.98. February of 2026, and it's come up since the time of this publication, $3.72 per gallon, a 74-cent increase. To summarize, another war started, costs passed to consumers, no clear end in sight. Thank you for listening. Share the watch. Stay informed. You can email bostwatch@gmail.com, and we'll see you in the next one.